Good evening to everybody. こんばんはです、皆さん。To all of you on the eastern side, good evening, good night, even. To everybody else, nice day always, isn't it? Good day. We are back again for another nighttime reading. The reader for tonight is me again, Kamishiro Taishi. Nope, I'm not Taishi. I'm Yoshiaki. We're pretty much the same person though. Pretty much. Your reader for tonight is me, Kamishiro Yoshiaki. And I hope this makes for a fun time. Or a sleepy time. If that's what you're here for. As always, I have my tea with me, my mugicha, my barley tea. So just sit back, throw your feet up, and let's get started. So last time we saw the protag basically get out of prison by doing the eclipse thing, right? And now we are gonna see what he does now that he's out and he has power invested in him by the state, by King Arthur. Alright, let's get started. Chapter 8, The Boss. To be vested with enormous authority is a fine thing, but to have the onlooking world consent to it is a finer. The tower episode solidified my power and made it impregnable. If any were perchance disposed to be jealous and critical before that, they experienced a change of heart now. There was not any one in the kingdom who would have considered it good judgment to meddle with my matters. I was fast getting adjusted to my situation and circumstances. For a time, I used to wake up mornings and smile in my dream and listen for the coat's factory whistle, but that sort of thing played itself out gradually, and at last I was fully able to realize that I was actually living in the 6th century and in Arthur's court, not a lunatic asylum. After that, I was just as much at home in that century as I could have been in any other, and as for preference, I wouldn't have traded it for the 20th. Look at the opportunities here for a man of knowledge, brains, pluck, and enterprise to sail in and grow up with the country. The grandest field that ever was, and all my own. Not a competitor, not a man who wasn't a baby to me in acquirements and capacities. Whereas, what would I amount to in the 20th century? I should be foreman of a factory, that is about all, and could drag a sign down a street any day and catch 100 better men than myself. What a jump I had made! I couldn't keep from thinking about it and contemplating it, just as one does who has struck oil. There was nothing back of me that could approach it, unless it might be Joseph's case, and Joseph's only approached it, didn't equal it quite. For it stands to reason that as Joseph's splendid financial ingenuities advantaged nobody but the king, the general public must have regarded him with a good deal of disfavor, whereas I had done my entire public a kindness in sparing the son, and was popular by reason of it. I was no shadow of a king, I was the substance. The king himself was the shadow. My power was colossal, and it was not a mere name as such things have generally been, it was the genuine article. I stood here, at the very spring and source of the second great period of the world's history, and could see the trickling stream of that history gather and deepen and broaden, and roll its mighty tides down the far centuries. And I could note the upspringing of adventurers like myself in the shelter of its long array of thrones. De Montforts, Gravestones, Mortimers, Villesiers, the war-making, campaign-directing wantons of France, and Charles II's scepter-wielding drabs. But nowhere in the procession was my full-sized fellow visible. I was a unique, and glad to know that that fact could not be dislodged or challenged for 13 centuries and a half for sure. Yes, In power, I was equal to the king. At the same time, there was another power that was a trifle stronger than both of us put together. That was the church. I do not wish to disguise that fact. I couldn't if I wanted to, but never mind about that now. It will show up in its proper place later on. It didn't cause me any trouble in the beginning, at least any of consequence. Well, it was a curious country, and full of interest. And the people! They were the quaintest and simplest and trustingest race. Why? They were nothing but rabbits. It was pitiful for a person born in a wholesome, free atmosphere to listen to the humble and hearty outpourings of loyalty toward the king and church and nobility, as if they had any more occasion to love and honor king and church and noble than a slave has to love and honor the lash, or a dog has to love and honor the stranger that kicks him. Why, dear me, any kind of royalty, howsoever modified, any kind of aristocracy, howsoever pruned, is rightly an insult. But if you're born and brought up under that sort of arrangement, you probably never find it out for yourself, and don't believe it when someone else tells you. It is enough to make a body ashamed of his race, to think of the sort of froth that has always occupied its thrones without shadow of right or reason, and the seventh-rate people that have always figured it as aristocracies, a company of monarchs and nobles who, as a rule, would have achieved only poverty and obscurity if left, like their betters, to their own exertions. The most of King Arthur's British nation were slaves, pure and simple, and bore that name, and wore the iron collar on their necks, and the rest were slaves in fact, but without the name. They imagined themselves men and freemen, and called themselves so. The truth was, the nation as a body was in the world for one subject, and one only, to grovel between king and church and noble, to slave for them, sweat blood for them, starve that they might be fed, work that they might play, drink misery to the dregs that they might be happy, go naked that they might wear silks and jewels, pay taxes that they might be swear from paying them, and be familiar all their lives with the degrading language and postures of adulation, that they might walk in pride and think themselves the gods of this world. And for all this, the thanks they got were cuffs and contempt, and so poor-spirited were they that they took even this sort of attention as an honor. Inherited ideas are a curious thing, and interesting to observe and examine. I had mine, the king and his people had theirs. In both cases, they flowed in ruts worn deep by time and habit, and the man who should have proposed to divert them by reason and argument would have had a long contract on his hands. For instance, these people had inherited the idea that all men without title and a long pedigree, whether they had great natural gifts and acquirements or hand, were creatures of no more consideration than so many animals, bugs, insects. Whereas I had inherited the idea that human dolls who can consent to masquerade in the peacock shams of inherited dignities and unearned titles are of no good but to be laughed at. The way I was looked upon was odd, but it was natural. You know how the keeper and the public regard the elephant in the menagerie? Well, that is the idea. They are full of admiration of his vast bulk and his prodigious strength. They speak with pride of the fact that he can do 100 marvels, which are far and away beyond their own powers. And they speak with the same pride of the fact that in his wrath he is able to drive 1,000 men before him. But does that make him one of them? No. The raggedest tramp in the pit would smile at that idea. He couldn't comprehend it, couldn't take it in, couldn't in any remote way conceive of it. Well, to the king, the nobles, and all the nation, down to the very slaves and tramps, I was just that kind of elephant, and nothing more. I was admired, also feared, but it was as an animal is admired and feared. The animal was not reverenced, neither was I. I was not even respected. I had no pedigree, no inherited title, so in the king's and nobles' eyes I was mere dirt. The people regarded me with wonder and awe, but there was no reverence mixed with it. Through the force of inherited ideas, they were not able to conceive of anything being entitled to that except pedigree and lordship. There you see the hand of that awful power, the Roman Catholic Church. In 2 or 3 little centuries, it had diverted a nation of men to a nation of worms. Before the day of the church's supremacy in the world, men were men and held their heads up, and had a man's pride and spirit and independence. And what of greatness and position a person he got mainly by achievement, not by birth. But then the church came to the front with an axe to grind, and she was wise, subtle, and knew more than one way to skin a cat, or a nation. She invented divine right of kings, and propped it all round, brick by brick, with the beatitudes, wrenching them from their good purpose, to make them fortify an evil one. She preached to the commoner humility, obedience to superiors, the beauty of self-sacrifice, and she preached to the commoner meekness under insult. Preached still to the commoner, always to the commoner, patience, meanness of spirit, non-resistance under oppression, and she introduced heritable ranks and aristocracies, and taught all the Christian populations of the earth to bow down to them and worship them. Even down to my birth century, that poison was still in the blood of Christendom, and the best of English commoners was still content to see his inferiors impudently continuing to hold a number of positions, such as lordships and the throne, to which the grotesque laws of his countries did not allow him to aspire. In fact, he was not merely contented with this strange condition of things, he was even able to persuade himself that he was proud of it. It seems to show that there isn't anything you can't stand if you are only born and bred into it. Of course, that taint, that reverence for rank and title, had been in our American blood too. I know that. But when I left America, it had disappeared, at least to all intents and purposes. The remnant of it was restricted to the dudes and dudesses. When a disease has worked its way down to that level, it may fairly be said to be out of the system. But to return to my anomalous position in King Arthur's kingdom. Here I was, a giant among pygmies, a man among children, a master intelligence among intellectual moles. By all rational measurement, the one and only actually great man in that whole British world. And yet there and there, just as in the remote England of my birth time, the sheep-witted earl who could claim long descent from a king's leman, acquired a second hand from the slums of London, was a better man than I was. Such a personage was fawned upon in Arthur's realm and reverently looked up to by everybody, even though his dispositions were as mean as his intelligence and his morals as base as his lineage. There were times where he could sit down in the king's presence, but I couldn't. I could have got a title easily enough, and that would have raised me a large step in everybody's eyes, even in the king's, the giver of it. But I didn't ask for it, and I declined it when it was offered. I couldn't have enjoyed such a thing with my notions, and it wouldn't have been fair anyway, because as far back as I could go, our tribe has always been short of the bar sinister. I couldn't have felt really and satisfactorily fine and proud and set up over any title, except one that should come from the nation itself, the only legitimate source. And such a one I hoped to win, and in the course of years of honest and honorable endeavor, I did win it, and did wear it with a high and clean pride. This title fell casually from the lips of a blacksmith one day in a village, was caught up as a happy thought, and tossed from mouth to mouth with a laugh and an affirmative vote. In 10 days, it had swept the kingdom, and was become as familiar as the king's name. I was never known by any other designation afterward, whether in the nation's talk or in grave debate upon matters of state at the council board of the sovereign. This title, translated into modern speech, would be the boss. Elected by the nation. That suited me, and it was a pretty high title. There were very few thes, and I was one of them. If you spoke of the Duke, or the Earl, or the Bishop, how could anybody tell which one you meant? But if you spoke of the King, or the Queen, or the boss, it was different. Well, I liked the King, and as King, I respected him. Respected the office, at least respected it as much as I was capable of respecting any unearned supremacy. But as men, I looked down upon him and his nobles, privately. And he and they liked me and respected my office, but as an animal without birth or sham title, they looked down upon me, and were not particularly private about it either. I didn't charge for my opinion about them, and they didn't charge for their opinion about me. the account was square, the books balanced, everybody was satisfied. Chapter 9, The Tournament. They were always having grand tournaments there at Camelot, and very stirring and picturesque and ridiculous human bullfights they were too, but just a little wearisome to the practical mind. However, I was generally on hand, for 2 reasons. A man must not hold himself aloof from the things which his friends and his community have at heart if he would be liked, especially as a statesman. And both as businessman and statesman, I wanted to study the tournament and see if I couldn't invent an improvement on it. That reminds me to remark, in passing, that the very first official thing I did in my administration, and it was on the very first day of it too, was to start a patent office. For I knew that a country without a patent office and good patent laws was just a crab and couldn't travel any way but sideways or backways. Things ran along. Tournament nearly every week, and now and then the boys used to want me to take a hand. I mean, Sir Launcelot and the rest. But I said I would by the by, no hurry yet, and too much government machinery to all up and set to rights and started going. A patent office. So the first thing that he does is a patent office. Let's think about that for a while. I suppose that makes sense, right? Because he's here to, his whole thing is I'm smarter than everybody else, because he acknowledges the importance of ideas and inventions. So a society would have to invent in order to proceed, right? Because like you would need like to improve things, to better things continuously, I assume. And it's not very conducive if everybody can just copy your ideas. Then you would be like, then why would I want to take the time and think about things and invent stuff, I suppose. So a patent office does make sense, I suppose. Now how is he going to enforce that? That's the important thing, huh? Let's see. We had one tournament, which was continued from day to day during more than a week, and as many as 500 knights took part in it, from first to last. They were weeks gathering. They came on horseback from everywhere, from the very ends of the country, and even from beyond the sea, and many brought ladies, and all brought squires and troops of servants. It was a most gaudy and gorgeous crowd, as to customary, and very characteristic of that country and the time, in the way of high animal spirits, innocent indecencies of language, and happy-hearted indifference to morals. It was fight or look on, all day and every day, and sing, gamble, dance, carouse half the night of every night. They had a most noble good time. You never saw such people. Those banks of beautiful ladies, shining in their barbaric splendors, would see a knight sprawl from his horse in the list, with a lance shaft the thickness of your ankle clean through him, and the blood spouting, and instead of fainting they would clap their hands and crowd each other for a better view. Only sometimes one would dive into her handkerchief and look ostentatiously broken-hearted, and then you could lay 2 to 1 that there was a scandal there somewhere, and she was afraid the public hadn't found out. The noise at night would have been annoying to me ordinarily, but I didn't mind it in the present circumstances, because it kept me from hearing the quacks detaching legs and arms from the day's cripples. They ruined an uncommon good old cross-cut saw for me, and broke the sawbuck too, but I let it pass. And as for my axe, well, I made up my mind that the next time I lent an axe to a surgeon, I would pick my century. I not only watched this tournament from day to day, but detailed an intelligent priest from my Department of Public Morals and Agriculture, and ordered him to report it, for it was my purpose, by and by, when I should have gotten the people far enough to start a newspaper. Yes, information society. Aha. The first thing you want in a new country is a patent office. Then work up your school system, and after that, out with your paper. A newspaper has its faults, and plenty of them, but no matter, it's hard from the tomb for a dead nation, and don't you forget it. You can't resurrect a dead nation without it. There isn't any other way. So I wanted to sample things and be finding out what sort of reported material I might be able to rake together out of the 6th century when I should come to need it. Well, the priest did very well, considering. He got in all the details, and that is a good thing in a local item. You see, he had kept books for the undertaker department of his church when he was younger, and there, the money's in the details. The more details, the more swag. Bearers, mutes, candles, prayers, everything counts. And if the bereaved don't buy prayers enough, you mark up your candles with a forked pencil, and your bill shows up all right. And he had a good knack at getting in the complimentary thing here and there about a night that was likely to advertise. No, I mean a night that had influence, and he also had a neat gift of exaggeration. For in his time, he had kept door for a pious hermit who lived in a sty and worked miracles. Of course, this novice's report lacked whoop and crash and lurid description, and therefore wanted the true ring, but its antique wording was quaint and sweet and simple, and full of the fragrances and flavors of the time, and these little merits made up in a measure for its more important lacks. Here is an extract from it. Then Sir Brian de la Isle and Grumor Grumosum, knights of the castle, encountered with Sir Aglovale and Sir Tor, and Sir Tor smote down Sir Grumor Grumosum to the earth. Then came Sir Carados of the Dolorous Tower, and Sir Turquine, knights of the castle, and there encountered with them Sir Percival de Galis and Sir Lamorak de Galis, that were two brethren, and there encountered Sir Percival with Sir Carados, and either breaks their spears unto their hands. And then Sir Turquine with Sir Lamorak, and either of them smote down other, horse and all, to the earth, and either parties rescued other and horsed them again. And Sir Oina so many fucking sirs. Sir and Sir Arnold, Sir Galter, knights of the castle, encountered with Sir Brandiles and Sir Kay, and these 4 knights encountered mightily, and brake their spears to their hands. Then came Sir Pertolope from the castle, and there they're all from the castle, man. And then came Sir Pertolope from the castle, and there encountered with him Sir Lionel, and there Sir Pertolope the Green Knight smote down Sir Lionel, brother to Sir Lancelot. All this was marked by noble heralds, who bear him best, and their names. Then Sir Bleoberis broke his spear upon Sir Gareth, but of that stroke Sir Bleoberis fell to the earth. When Sir Galihodin saw that, he bade Sir Gareth keep him, and Sir Gareth smote him to the earth. Then Sir Galihud got a spear to avenge his brother, and in the same wise Sir Gareth served him. And Sir Dinadan and his brother his brother's not a sir, and Sir Dinadan and his brother Lacote Tail, and Sir Gregomore le Desirius, and Sir Dionydus le Savage, all these he bare down with one spear. When King Aswasons of Ireland saw Sir Gareth fare so, he marveled what he might be, that one time seemed green, and another time, at his again coming, he seemed blue. And thus at every course that he rode to and fro, he changed his color, so that there might neither king nor knight have ready cognizance of him. Then Sir Agwisance, the King of Ireland, encountered with Sir Gareth, and there Sir Gareth smote him from his horse, saddle and all. And then came King Carados of Scotland, and Sir Gareth smote him down, horse and man. And in the same wise he served King Uriens of the land of Gore. And then there came in Sir Bagdemagus, and Sir Gareth smote him down, horse and man, to the earth. And Bagdemagus' son Meliganus broke a spear upon Sir Gareth mightily and knightly. And then Sir Galahad, the noble prince, cried on high, knight with the many colors, "Well hast thou justed, now make thee ready that I may just with thee." Sir Gareth heard him, and he got a great spear, and so they encountered together, and there does Prince break his spear. But Sir Gareth smote him upon the left side of the helm, that he reeled here and there, and he had fallen down had not his men recovered him. Truly, said King Arthur, that knight with the many colours is a good knight. Wherefore the king called unto him Sir Launcelot, and prayed him to encounter with that knight. Sir, said Launcelot, I may as well find in my heart for to forbear him at this time, for he hath had travail enough this day, and when a good knight doth so well on Sunday, it is no good knight's part to let him off his worship, and namely, when he seeth a knight hath done so great labour, for peradventure, said Sir Launcelot, his quarrel is here this day, and peradventure he is best beloved with his lady of all that be here, for I see well he painteth himself, and enforceth him to do great deeds, and therefore, said Sir Launcelot, as for me, this day he shall have the honour, though it lay in my power to put him from him, I would not. Okay, what did I just read? What the fuck? Basically, this guy called Sir Gareth. Gareth basically changed his colors a lot. He basically just killed everybody. He knocked everybody out of their horses, right? and then King Arthur's asking Lancelot to just go like, hey, you fight him. And Lancelot's like, I can beat him, but he's on a roll, and let's not rain on his parade. Basically, that's basically what happens, right? 逃げたんじゃねえかよ. He ran away. Lancelot basically ran away. God. There was an unpleasant little episode that day, which for reasons of state I struck out of my priest's report. You will have noticed that Gary was doing some great fighting in the engagement. When I say Gary, I meant Sir Gareth. Gary was my private pet name for him. It suggests that I had a deep affection for him, and that was the case. But it was a private pet name only, and never spoken aloud to anyone, much less to him. Being a noble, he would not have endured a familiarity like that from me. Well, to proceed, I sat in the private box set apart for me as the king's minister. While Sir Dinadan was waiting for his turn to enter the lists, he came in there and sat down and began to talk, for he was always making up to me because I was a stranger and he liked to have a fresh market for his jokes, the most of them having reached that state of where the teller has to do laughing himself while the other person looks sick. I had always responded to his efforts as well as I could, and felt a very deep and real kindness for him too, for the reason that if by malice of fate he knew the one particular anecdote which I had heard oftenest and had most hated and most loathed all my life, he had at least spared it me. It was one which I had heard attributed to every humorous person who had ever stood on American soil, from Columbus down to Artemus Ward. It was about a humorous lecturer who flooded an ignorant audience with the killingest jokes for an hour and never got a laugh. And then when he was leaving, some great simpletons wrung him gratefully by the hand and said it had been the funniest thing they had ever heard, and it was all they could do to keep from laughing right out and meaning. That anecdote never saw the day it was worth the telling, and yet I had sat under the telling of it hundreds and thousands and millions and billions of times, and cried and cursed all the way through. Then who can hope to know what my feelings were, to hear this armor-plated ass started on it again, in the murky twilight of tradition, before the dawn of history, while even Lactantius might be referred to as the late Lactantius, and the Crusades wouldn't be born for 500 years yet. Just as he finished, the cowboy came, so, haw-hawing like a demon, he went rattling and clanking out like a crate of loose castings, and I knew nothing more. It was some minutes before I came to, and then I opened my eyes just in time to see Sir Gareth fetch him an awful welt, and unconsciously out with the prayer, "I hope to gracious he's killed!" But by ill luck, before I had got halfway through the words, Sir Gareth crashed into Sir Sagramore le Desirous and sent him thundering over his horse's crupper, and Sir Sagramore caught my remark and thought I meant it for him. Well, whenever one of those people got a thing into his head, there was no getting it out again. I knew that, so I saved my breath and offered no explanations. As soon as Sir Sagramore got well, he notified me that there was a little account to settle between us, and he named a day 3 or 4 years in the future, place of settlement, the lists where the offense had been given. I said I'd be ready when he got back. You see, he was going for the Holy Grail. The boys all took a flyer at the Holy Grail now and then. It was a several years cruise. They always put in a long absence snooping around in the most conscientious way, though none of them had any idea where the Holy Grail really was, and I don't think any of them actually expected to find it, or would have known what to do with it if he had run across it. You see, it was just the Northwest Passage of that day, as you might say. That was all. Every year, expeditions went out Holy Grailing, and the next year, relief expeditions went out to hunt for them. There was worlds of reputation in it, but no money. Why, they actually wanted me to put in. Well, I should smile. Kekko shinatsu da na. This guy's pretty tough on the guys, eh? Well, I mean, I suppose. What's a jousting competition anyways? Doesn't seem fun. There's lots of people getting hurt. I suppose I agree a little bit with the boss in this aspect. Chapter 10. Beginnings of Civilization. Here we go. Naisei Chito. Kita. The round table soon heard of the challenge, and of course it was a good deal discussed, for such things interested the boys. The king thought I ought now to set forth in quest of adventures, so that I might gain renown and be the more worthy to meet Sir Sagramore when the several years should have rolled away. I excused myself for the present. I said it would take me 3 or 4 years yet to get things well fixed up and going smoothly. Then I should be ready. All the chances were that at the end of that time, Sir Sagramore would still be out grilling, so no valuable time would be lost by the postponement. I should then have been in office 6 or 7 years, and I believe my system and machinery would be so well developed that I could take a holiday without its working any harm. I was pretty well satisfied with what I had already accomplished. In various quiet nooks and corners, I had the beginnings of all sorts of industries underway. Nuclei of future vast factories, the iron and steel missionaries of my future civilization. In these were gathered together the brightest young minds I could find, and I kept agents out, raking the country for more, all the time. I was training a crowd of ignorant folk into experts in every sort of handiwork and scientific calling. These nurseries of mine went smoothly and privately along undisturbed in their obscure country retreats, for nobody was allowed to come into their precincts without a special permit, for I was afraid of the church. I had started a teacher factory and a lot of Sunday schools, the first government. It is the worst form that is possible. My works showed what a despot could do with the resources of a kingdom at his command. Unsuspected by this dark land, I had the civilization of the 19th century booming under its very nose. It was fenced away from the public view, but there it was, a gigantic and unassailable fact, and to be heard from yet if I lived and had luck. There it was, as sure a fact and as substantial a fact as any serene volcano, standing innocent with its smokeless summit in a blue sky and giving no sign of the rising hell in its bowels. My schools and churches were children 4 years before. They were grown up now. My shops of that day were vast factories now, where I had a dozen trained men then, I had 1,000 now. Where I had one brilliant expert then, I had 50 now. I stood with my hand on the cock, so to speak, ready to turn it on and flood the midnight world with light at any moment. But I was not going to do the thing in that sudden way. It was not my policy. The people could not have stood it, and moreover, I should have had the established Roman Catholic Church on my back in a minute. No, I had been going cautiously all the while. I had confidential agents trickling through the country sometime, whose office was to undermine knighthood by imperceptible degrees, and to gnaw a little at this and that and all the other superstitions, and so prepare the way gradually for a better order of things. I was turning on my light one candle power at a time and meant to continue to do so. I had scattered some branch schools secretly about the kingdom, and they were doing very well. I meant to work this racket more and more as time wore on, if nothing occurred to frighten me. One of my deepest secrets was my West Point, my military academy. I kept that most jealously out of sight, and I did the same with my naval academy, which I had established at a remote seaport. Both were prospering to my satisfaction. Oh shit, I missed a page. I missed a page. Go back. Go back. I had started a teacher factory and a lot of Sunday schools. The first thing. As a result, I now had an admirable system of graded schools in full blast in those places, and also a complete variety of Protestant congregations, all in a prosperous and growing condition. Everybody could be any kind of a Christian he wanted to. There was perfect freedom in that matter. But I confined public religious teaching to the churches and the Sunday schools, permitting nothing of it in my other educational buildings. I could have given my own sect the preference and made everybody a Presbyterian without any trouble, but that would have been to affront a law of human nature. Spiritual wants and instincts are as various in the human family as our physical appetites, complexions, and features, and a man is only at his best, morally, when he is equipped with the religious garments whose color and shape and size most nicely accommodate themselves to the spiritual complexion, angularities, and stature of the individual who wears it. And besides, I was afraid of a united church. It makes a mighty power, the mightiest conceivable. And then when it by and by gets into selfish hands, as it is always bound to do, it means death to human liberty and paralysis to human thought. All mines were royal property, and there were a good many of them. They had formerly been worked as savages always worked mines. Holes grubbed in the earth, and the mineral brought up in sacks of hide by hand, at the rate of a ton a day. But I had begun to put the mining on a scientific basis as early as I could. Yes, I had made pretty handsome progress when Sir Sagremore's challenge struck me. 4 years rolled by, and then, well, you would never imagine it in the world. Unlimited power is the ideal thing when it is in safe hands. The despotism of heaven is the one absolutely perfect government. An earthly despotism would be the absolutely perfect earthly government if the conditions were the same, namely, the despot the perfectest individual of the human race, and his lease of life perpetual. But as a perishable perfect man must die, and leave his despotism in the hands of an imperfect successor, an earthly despotism is not merely a bad form of government, it is the worst form that is possible. I kind of agree with this. これちょっと賛成。You might get a bit of flack for saying this, but democracy is not all that efficient, is it? Democracy is not all that efficient. You get people fighting each other just to get the simplest things done. But with a despot, he has all the power, and he's just like, do this, and it's done. And that's it. Then again, as the boss says here, sure, you could have a good despot, and he has like the perfect government and everything, but then he would die one day, and then he has to give it to a less perfect successor. So, you know, pros and cons, I suppose. My works showed what a despot could do with the resources of a kingdom at his command. Unsuspected by this dark land, I had the civilization of the 19th century booming under its very nose. It was fenced away from the public view, but there it was, a gigantic and unassailable fact, and to be heard from yet, if I lived and had luck. There it was, as sure a fact and as substantial a fact as any serene volcano, standing innocent with its smokeless summit in the blue sky and giving no sign of the rising hell in its bowels. My schools and churches were children 4 years before. They were grown up now. My shops of the day were vast factories now. Where I had a dozen trained men then, I had 1,000 now. Where I had one brilliant expert then, I had 50 now. I stood with my hand on the cock, so to speak, ready to turn it on and flood the midnight world with light at any moment. But I was not going to do the thing in that sudden way. It was not my policy. The people could not have stood it, and moreover, I should have had the established Roman Catholic Church on my back in a minute. No, I had been going cautiously all the while. I had confidential agents trickling through the country sometime, whose office was to undermine knighthood by imperceptible degrees, and to gnaw a little at this and that and the other superstition, and so prepare the way gradually for a better order of things. I was turning on my light, one candle power at a time, and meant to continue to do so. I had scattered some branch schools secretly about the kingdom, and they were doing very well. I meant to work this racket more and more as time wore on, if nothing occurred to frighten me. One of my deepest secrets was my West Point, my military academy. I kept that most jealously out of sight, and I did the same with my naval academy, which I had established at a remote seaport. Both were prospering to my satisfaction. Clarence was 22 now, and was my head executive, my right hand. He was a darling. He was equal to anything. There wasn't anything he couldn't turn his hand to. Of late, I had been training him for journalism, for the time seemed about right for his start in the newspaper line. Nothing big, but just a small weekly for experimental circulation in my civilization nurseries. He took to it like a duck. There was an editor concealed in him, sure. Already, he had doubled himself in one way. He talked 6th century and wrote 19th. His journalistic style was climbing steadily, and it was already up to the back settlement Alabama mark, and couldn't be told from the editorial output of that region either, by matter or flavor. Rude. Randomly just dissing Alabama. Alright. We had another large departure on hand too. This was a telegraph and a telephone, our first venture in this line. These wires were for private service only, as yet, and must be kept private until a riper day should come. We had a gang of men on the road, working mainly by night. They were stringing ground wires. We were afraid to put up poles, for they would attract too much inquiry. Ground wires were good enough in both instances, for my wires were protected by an insulation of my own invention, which was perfect. My men had orders to strike across country, avoiding roads, and establishing connection with any considerable towns whose lights betrayed this presence, and leaving experts in charge. Nobody could tell you how to find any place in the kingdom, for nobody ever went intentionally to any place, but only struck it by accident in his wanderings, and then generally left it without thinking to inquire what its name was. At one time and another, we had sent out topographical expeditions to survey and map the kingdom, but the priests had always interfered and raised trouble. So we had given the thing up for the present. It would be poor wisdom to antagonize the church. As for the general condition of the country, it was as it had been when I arrived in it, to all intents and purposes. I had made changes, but they were necessarily slight, and they were not noticeable. Thus far, I had not even meddled with taxation, outside of the taxes which provided the royal revenues. I had systemized those, and put the service on an effective and righteous basis. As a result, those revenues were already quadrupled, and yet the burden was so much more equably distributed than before that all the kingdom felt a sense of relief, and the praises of my administration were hearty and general. Personally, I struck an interruption now, but I did not mind it. It could not have happened at a better time. Earlier, it could have annoyed me, but now everything was in good hands and swimming right along. The king had reminded me several times of late that the postponement I had asked for 4 years before had about run out now. It was a hint that I ought to be starting out to seek adventures and get up a reputation of a size to make me worthy of the honor of breaking a lance with Sir Sagramore, who was still out grilling, but was being hunted for by various relief expeditions and might be found any year now. So you see, I was expecting this interruption. It did not take me by surprise. Do you think he has guns now? He probably has guns now, right? What is this guy holding? こいつ何持ってるの？わかんない。West Pointer. So he's gonna go searching for the Holy Grail now. Does he have guns? See how long this is. It's pretty long. Let's try to finish this. Let's do it. Chapter 11. The Yankee in Search of Adventures. Hold on. Kitsui ne. It's actually pretty tough to keep reading for so long. Huh. There never was such a country for wandering liars, and they were of both sexes. Hardly a month went by without one of these tramps arriving, and generally loaded with a tale about some princess or other wanting help to get her out of some faraway castle where she was held in captivity by a lawless scoundrel, usually a giant. Now you would think that the first thing the king would do after listening to such a novelette from an entire stranger would be to ask for credentials. Yes, and a pointer or two as to the locality of castle, best road to it, and so on. But nobody ever thought of so simple and common sense a thing as that. No, everybody swallowed these people's lives whole, and never asked a question of any sort or about anything. Well, one day when I was not around, one of these people came along. It was a she one, this time, and told a tale of the usual pattern. Her mistress was a captive in a vast and gloomy castle, along with 44 other young and beautiful girls, pretty much all of them princesses. They had been languishing in that cruel captivity for 26 years. The masters of the castle were 3 stupendous brothers, each with 4 arms and 1 eye, the eye in the center of the forehead, and as big as a fruit. Sort of fruit not mentioned, their usual slovenliness in statistics. Would you believe it? The king and the whole round table were in raptures over this preposterous opportunity for adventure. Every knight of the table jumped for the chance, had begged for it. But to their vexation and chagrin, the king conferred it upon me, who had not asked for it at all. By an effort, I contained my joy when Clarence brought me the news, but he could not contain his. His mouth gushed delight and gratitude in a steady discharge. Delight in my good fortune, gratitude to the king for this splendid mark of his favor for me. He could keep neither his legs nor his body still, but pirouetted about the place in an airy ecstasy of happiness. On my side, I could have cursed the kindness that conferred upon me this benefaction, but I kept my vexation under the surface for policy's sake, and did what I could to let on to being glad. Indeed, I said I was glad, and in a way it was true. I was as glad as a person is when he's scalped. So he's not glad at all. Well, one must make the best of things, and not waste time with useless fretting, but get down to business and see what can be done. In all lives there is wheat among the chaff. I must get at the wheat in this case. So I sent for the girl, and she came. She was a comely enough creature, and soft and modest. But if science went for anything, she didn't know as much as a lady's watch. I said, "My dear, have you been questioned as to particulars?" She said she hadn't. Well, I didn't expect you had, but I thought I would just ask to make sure. It's the way I've been raised. Now, you mustn't take it unkindly if I remind you that, as we don't know you, we must go a little slow. You may be all right, of course, and we'll hope that you are, but to take it for granted isn't business. You understand that. I'm obliged to ask you a few questions. Just answer up fair and square, and don't be afraid. Where do you live when you are at home? In the land of Mordor, fair sir. Land of Mordor. I don't remember hearing of it before. Parents living? As to that, I know not if they be yet alive, since it has been years I have lain shut up in the castle. Your name, please? I hide the Demoiselle Alessandre de Cartelos, and it please you. Do you know anybody here who can identify you? That were not likely, fair lord, I being come hither now for the first time. Have you brought any letters, any documents, any proofs that you are trustworthy and truthful? Of a surety, no, and wherefore should I? Have I not a tongue, and cannot I say all that myself? But you're saying it, and somebody else is saying it. This is different. Different? How might that be? I fear me I do not understand. Land of... Why you say... Why? Great God. Great Scott. Can't you understand a little thing like that? Can't you understand the difference between your... Why do you look so innocent and idiotic? I? In truth, I know not, but an it were the will of God? Yes, I reckon that's about the size of it. Don't mind my seeming excited, I'm not. Let us change the subject. Now as to this castle with 45 princesses in it and 3 ogres at the head of it, tell me, where is this harem? Harem? The castle. You understand. Where's the castle? Oh, as to that, it is great and strong and well beseen, and lieth in a far country. Yes, it is many leagues. How many? Ah, fair sir, it were wonderly hard to tell, and there are so many, and do so lap the one upon the other, and made all in the same image, and tincted with the same color. One might not know the one league from its fellow, nor how to count them, except they be taken apart, and ye wit well it were God's work to do that, being not within man's capacity, for you will... Hold on. Never mind about the distance. Whereabouts does the castle lie? What's the direction from here? Ah, it please you, sir, it hath no direction from here, by reason that the road lieth not straight, but turneth evermore, wherefore the direction of its place abideth not, but it is sometime under the one sky, and anon under another. Whereso if ye be minded that it is in the east, and wend thitherward, ye shall observe that the way of the road doth yet again turn upon itself, by the space of half a circle, and this marvel happening again and again, and still again, it will grieve you that ye have thought by vanities of the mind to thwart and bring to naught the will of him that giveth not a castle a direction from a place except it pleaseth him. And if it please him not, will the rather that even all castles and all directions thereunto vanish out of the earth, leaving the places wherein they tarried desolate and vacant, so warning his creatures that where he will, and where he will not, he... Oh, that's all right. Give us a rest. Never mind about the direction. Hang the direction. I beg pardon. I beg 1,000 pardons. I am not well today. Pay no attention when I soliloquize. It is an old habit, bad habit, and hard to get rid of when one's digestion is all disordered with eating food that was raised forever and ever before he was born. Good land. A man can't keep his functions regular on spring chickens 1,300 years old. But come, never mind about that. Let's, have you got such a thing as a map of the region about you? Now a good map, is it peradventure that manner of thing which of late unbelievers have brought over the great seas, which, being boiled in oil, and an onion and salt added thereto, doth... What? A map? What are you talking about? Don't you know what a map is? There. Never mind. Don't explain. I hate explanation. They fog the thing up so that you can't tell anything about it. Run along, dear. Good day. Show her the way, Clarence. Oh, well, it was reasonably plain now why these donkeys didn't prospect these lies for details. It may be that this girl had a fact in her somewhere, but I don't believe you could have sluiced it out with a hydraulic, nor got to it with earlier forms of blasting even. It was a case for dynamite. Why, she was a perfect ass. And yet the king and his knights had listened to her as if she had been a leaf out of the gospel. It kind of sizes up the whole party. And think of the simple ways of this court. This wandering wench hadn't any more trouble to get access to the king in his palace than she would have had to get into the poorhouse in my day and country. In fact, he was glad to see her, glad to hear her tale. With that adventure of hers to offer, she was as welcome as a corpse as it is to a coroner. Ooh, 結構長いね. Just as I was ending up these reflections, Clarence came back. I remarked upon the barren result of my efforts with the girl. Hadn't got hold of a single point that could help me find the castle. The youth looked a little surprised, or puzzled, or something, and intimated that he had been wondering to himself what I wanted to ask the girl all those questions for. Why, great guns, I said. Don't I want to find the castle? And how else would I go about it? La, sweet your worship, one might lightly answer that, I ween. She will go with thee. They always do. She will ride with thee. Ride with me? Nonsense! But of a truth she will. She will ride with thee. Thou shalt see. What? She browsed around the hills and scoured the woods alone, and I as good as engaged to be married. Why, it's scandalous. Think how it would look. My, the dear face that rolled before me. The boy was eager to know all about this tender matter. I swore him to secrecy and then whispered her name, Puss Flanagan. He looked disappointed and said he didn't remember the countess. How natural it was for the little courtier to give her a rank. He asked me where she lived. In East Hart. I came to myself and stopped, a little confused. Then I said, never mind now. I'll tell you sometime. And might he see her? Would I let him see her someday? It was but a little thing to promise, 1300 years or so, and he so eager, so I said yes. But I sighed. I couldn't help it. And yet there was no sense in sighing, for she wasn't born yet. But that is the way we are made. We don't reason where we feel, we just feel. My expedition was all the talk that day and that night, and the boys were very good to me, and made much of me, and seemed to have forgotten their vexation and disappointment, and come to be as anxious for me to hide those ogres and set those ripe old virgins loose as if it were themselves that had the contract. Well, they were good children, but just children, that is all. And they gave me no end of points about how to scout for giants and how to scoop them in, and they told me all sorts of charms against enchantments and gave me salves and other rubbish to put on my wounds. But it never occurred to one of them to reflect that if I was such a wonderful necromancer as I was pretending to be, I ought not to need salves or instructions or charms against enchantments, and, least of all, arms and armor on a foray of any kind, even against fire-spouting dragons and devils hot from perdition, let alone such poor adversaries as these I was after, these commonplace ogres of the back settlements. I was to have an early breakfast and start at dawn, for that was the usual way, but I had the demon's own time with my armor, and this delayed me a little. It is troublesome to get into, and there's so much detail. First, you wrap a layer or two of blanket around your body for a sort of cushion and to keep off the cold iron. Then you put on your sleeves and shirt of chainmail. These are made of small steel links woven together, and they form a fabric so flexible that if you toss your shirt onto the floor, it slumps into a pile like a peck of wet fish net. It is very heavy, and is nearly the uncomfortablest material in the world for a nightshirt. Yet plenty used it for that. Tax collectors and reformers, and one-horse kings with a defective title, and those sorts of people. Then you put on your shoes, flat bolts roofed over with interleaving bands of steel, and screw your clumsy spurs into the heels. Next, you buckle your greaves on your legs and your cuisses on your thighs, then come your backplate and your breastplate, and you begin to feel crowded. Then you hitch onto the breastplate the half petticoat of broad overlapping bands of steel, which hangs down in front but is scalloped out behind so you can sit down, and isn't any real improvement on an inverted coal scuttle, either for looks or for wear, or to wipe your hands on. Next, you belt on your sword, then you put your stovepipe joints onto your arms, your iron gauntlets onto your hands, your iron rat trap onto your head, with a rag of steel web hitched onto it to hang over the back of your neck. And there you are, snug as a candle, in a candle mold. There's no time to dance. Well, a man that is packed away like that is a nut that isn't worth the cracking. There's so little of the meat when you get down to it by comparison of the shell. The boys helped me, or I could never have got in. Just as we finished, Sir Bedivere happened in, and I saw that as like as not I hadn't chosen the most convenient outfit for a long trip. How stately he looked, and tall and broad and grand. He had on his head a conical steel casket that only came down to his ears, and for visor had only a narrow steel bar that extended down to his upper lip and protected his nose. And all the rest of him, from neck to heel, was flexible chainmail, trousers and all. But pretty much all of him was hidden under his outside garment, which of course was of chainmail, as I said, and hung straight from his shoulders to his ankles, and from his middle to the bottom, both before and behind, was divided, so that he could ride and let the skirts hang down on each side. He was going grayling, and it was just the outfit for it too. I would have given a good deal for the ulster, but it was too late now to be fooling around. The sun was just up, the king and the court were all on hand to see me off and wish me luck, so it wouldn't be etiquette for me to tarry. You don't get on your horse yourself, no. If you tried, you would be disappointed. They carry you out, just as they carry a sunstruck man to the drugstore, and put you on, and help get you to rights, and fix your feet in the stirrups, and all the while you do feel so strange and stuffy and like somebody else, like somebody that had been married on a sudden, or struck by lightning, or something like that, and hasn't been quite fetched around yet, and is sort of numb and can't just get his bearings. Then they stood up the mast they called a spear in its socket by my left foot, and I gripped it with my hand. Lastly, they hung my shield around my neck, and I was all complete and ready to up anchor and get to sea. Everybody was as good to me as they could be, and the maid of honor gave me the stirrup cup her own self. There was nothing more to do now but for that damsel to get up behind me on the pillion, which she did, and put an arm or so around me to hold on. And so we started, and everybody gave us a goodbye and waved their handkerchiefs or helmets. And everybody we met, going down the hill and through the village, was respectful to us, except some shabby little boys on the outskirts. They said, "Hey, look what a guy!" and hove clods at us. In my experience, boys are the same in all ages. They don't respect anything, they don't care for anything or anybody. They say, "Go up, bald head," to the prophet going his unoffending way in the grey of antiquity. They sass me in the holy gloom of the Middle Ages, and I had seen them act the same way in Buchanan's administration. If I remember, because I was there and helped. The prophet has his bears and settled with his boys. I wanted to get down and settle with mine, but it wouldn't answer, because I couldn't have got up again. I hate a country without a Derek. Alright, we're done for today. A little bit overtime, because we read a page twice. But yep, that is it for up to chapter 11. Hope you had a good time. So there was a time slip there, huh? There was a time slip. 4 years. What do you think he has made in those 4 years? Pretty interesting. Come on, I'd like to think he made a gun at least, right? He has all these factories and stuff. But I suppose we'll see. Alright, that is it for today. I'll see you guys again. Sorry about that. See you guys again tomorrow, I suppose.